As John read to us this morning, we are going to be tackling a classic text in the book of Mark. We have been working through this gospel together, and we are going to look at a passage of scripture that is a classic text. I've told you before, Mark has begun his gospel with the purpose of pointing out to his readers who Christ is. He has begun by pointing out that he is Christ, that is the Messiah, and in fact, he's the Son of God. How would you go about if you were going to lay that out for people to catch on to who this Jesus is? What would you write? What would you include? What would you make sure your readers understand? Well, one of the things, of course, is Jesus' miracles. No less true in the feeding of the multitude. This text is you're extremely familiar with. If you've been in Sunday school at all, your very first Sunday there as a child, this was the story they taught you, and it is certainly very well known. In fact, so well known that if you don't mind just a little bit of an aside, I received a Christmas present this year. It's a board game, Euro game. Some of you know I like to play Euro board games. Lahav, it's a great game. I'm not here as a game evangelist, but if you're interested in learning a really good game, it's a little heady. One of the buildings that you can purchase, this is based on a seafaring theme, a harbor theme, is called the church. You can see that it's worth 26 points at the end of the game. It's really worth your purchase if you know how the game is played. Here's what the rules say. A player may only enter the church if he has at least 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. These are commodities that you collect through the game. They receive an additional 5 bread and 3 fish. It's a miracle. Clearly, this is based upon the fact that this is included in this game for public consumption, because this event in history is so well known that it's assumed that you would catch on to why this is included as part of the game. If you put your marker there, the building shows Lahav's Church of St. Joseph. It says at the beginning, at the end of the paragraph of the instructions, the action represents the biblical story of the feeding of the multitude. This, by the way, I don't know if you know this story, but it is the only event in the Gospels. Why is it that all 4 Gospel writers see this as being a quintessential event? That this is something that they must include. This is one of the reasons that it is so popular and so well known and so overly taught, is because every Gospel writer includes it. So in order for us to understand this text, which I know you're probably more familiar with than I would like to think, we need to look at a little bit of context. Let me try to give you a run at why Mark has placed this event where he has in his gospel text. A little bit of context. John the Baptist is about to lose his head. You know that he is beheaded. Mark chapter 6, verse 21 and 22. An opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." And of course, you know the story. She asks for John the Baptist's head on a platter at her mother's prompting. And of course, that is what she receives. What a delightful gift. So here you have, right before the feeding of the multitude, you have this picture of what the human government is doing. They're celebrating themselves. This, by the way, this banquet on his birthday is one of the reasons. This is an aside, but this is the reason, this is the text why Jehovah's Witnesses do not celebrate birthdays. They see that this is not an appropriate way to behave, or whatever the case. I'm not sure all their theology behind it, but this is their proof text for why you shouldn't celebrate your birthday. That aside, that's just an aside. What we see here is these people celebrating themselves. This is the vignette. They are having a banquet. What do we see of the human government? They are corrupt. They're putting to death people who are innocent, and they're having a great banquet, a great feast for themselves. Flash to the next scene. Now we see Jesus' government. We now know that Jesus sent out his 12 apostles. You might remember this is earlier in the book of Mark. He sent them out to multiply himself. He sent them out in groups of 2, and he gave them authority to speak and to preach and to perform miracles, to cast out demons. And so now they're returning. the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that he had done and taught. First scene, here's the human government. Next scene, here's Jesus' government. His leaders are now coming back, and they're reporting what they've been doing. Interestingly enough, none of this is recorded for us. That's what we get. They came back and told Jesus everything that happened. Okay, could you tell us? Apparently not. We don't hear any part of it. We don't know what took place. We don't know where they went. We don't know what stories they're sharing. It's silent to us in history. And I think one of the reasons for this is because the gospel, the point of the gospel is to point to Jesus and not distract us. We don't need to start thinking that somehow these apostles are equal to or get confused about them. That's not part of the story. But he wants us to see that they're coming back, and now he is setting up his kingdom. His kingdom has his leadership, the world's leadership and Jesus' leadership. So, next verse. The apostles returned, verse 30 and 31. Mark 6, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going. They had no leisure even to eat. You've been working hard. You've gone out. It's now time for a break. You've been going around place to place, town to town, village to village. All of Galilee now knows who we are. All of Galilee has now heard of the kingdom of God, that there is a new kingdom pressing into the hearts of men. We've seen, Mark showed us what the human kingdom's doing. Now we're beginning to catch a sight of what his kingdom is doing. And so it's time for a holiday. So they're going to go to a desolate place. That is a strange phrase to our ears. We often think of something that's full of sand and hot sun. That's not the idea behind this phrase. It is just a place where there is no civilization. It's a place where farmers are not plowing the fields, where you're not going to find crops. It's just a place, it could be full of vegetation, but it's a place of complete destitute from all basic human traces. You might think of it as your back 40. We're going camping in the middle of the woods. Whatever you want to say, that is where they're headed. They're looking for a desolate place. Why? Many were coming. As soon as a crowd would come, someone that would go, some more would come, some would go, more would come. They had no leisure even to eat. That is such a great expression to put in your mind how busy the disciples have been with regard to these people, these crowds of people. And again, Mark's all about the crowds, the people gathering around Jesus, and here's the crowds. They can't even eat. Have you ever had a day like that where you're just so busy, going through the drive-thru is taking too long? You've just got to keep on the move. So that's where they're headed. They went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. This is all context. This is all leading up to the great event. This is the effort. They have been away. They're trying to get away from the crowd. So they get in the boat to a desolate place. It's time to do some camping. We don't know exactly where this event took place. We do know that it was on the Sea of Galilee that it's referencing when they get into the boat. And from what we can gather from the geography of what the other gospel writers tell us, we know that it wasn't a long journey. It was most likely along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. They would get in a boat and they would just, for these few moments, 5 kilometers or 4 kilometers or so, they would have some peace and quiet. But needless to say, Mark 6:33 tells us this happened. And many saw them going and recognized them. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So there they are, taking their journey, not really too far from shore. And so every time they're passing by, somebody on the shore looked up and recognized who those people are. Look, they're going over there. And so they could see them, and so they started to run along the shore and followed the boat. And as they would reach the next village, they would point, look on the sea. They would notice there's more people, and everybody recognized them, and everybody who was interested. And before you know it, they get to their so-called desolate place, and surprisingly enough, when they went ashore, he saw a great crowd. Now, what is your reaction? What would your reaction be when you show up for your holidays only to discover that somebody has brought some work for you to do? That your boss is there, your employees have arrived, your phone is ringing. There's now something new on your agenda right in front of you. Now, I don't know what your response would be, but I can tell you mine would not be fun, would not be pretty, would not be happy. Now, this is one of the most fascinating moments and glimpses of the heart of Christ. This gives us a picture of who this Jesus is, because he does not react like you do, like I would. They went ashore and saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them. Get out of town. Who's like this? Only Jesus. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. That's an interesting expression. You know, I don't know much about sheep. You know, I grew up in the city of Toronto. There aren't a lot of sheep in Toronto unless you're going to eat them. You find them in the grocery aisle, and they're delicious. Sheep are among the, what we're told, the more simpler of creatures that need constant and continual care. They need to be looked after. They need to be watched over. They need to be cared for. They're completely helpless. Something gets into their fur. They don't even know how to handle their own situation. They can't find food without help. They're basically always in need. That's my understanding. Could be wrong. I'm not a shepherd. But this is the picture. Jesus had compassion on them. He sees these people and he recognizes they have a need that they cannot meet themselves. They have a need that they're looking for something. They are looking for answers. They are scrambling to find the reasons for life and whatever's going on. He began to teach them many things. This little phrase, they were like sheep without a shepherd, I think Mark is referencing back to something in Numbers 27. Numbers 27 is a time when Moses is praying to God, if you will. Verses 15 to 17. Moses spoke to the Lord. Let the Lord God of the spirits of all flesh appoint a man over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall lead them out and bring them in. The reason is because Moses recognizes that he's growing old, he's about to die, and he's pleading with God, please, they need a leader. They need somebody to help these people. Why? That the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd. This is an Old Testament phrase. This is not the only place in Scripture. In Ezekiel as well, this little phrase is used of Israel, that they are like sheep without a shepherd. Now, if you know your story in Numbers 27, and I think that Mark is referencing this in some perhaps vague way, but clear to any Jewish person who would be thinking about this text. Who is the leader that follows Moses? Class, what is his name? Joshua is correct. Joshua is our English form of the Hebrew word, of the Greek word Yeshua, the Hebrew rendering of the word Yeshua. Yeshua in English is Joshua. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you at all, but here's my point. Jesus, the name Jesus, is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Yeshua. Jesus in English is Joshua. It's interesting, I think, that Mark is pulling on these themes. These are like people without a shepherd. They are sheep without a shepherd. They need a leader. They need someone to follow. Who was the person that came after Moses spoke about the people of Israel needing to have a leader like sheep without a shepherd? It was Joshua. Who are the people that are described this way? They are Israel and they're before Jesus. And what does Mark try to bring the Jewish mind to recognize? That Jesus, aka Joshua, same name, is now the leader of Israel. They are like sheep without a shepherd. It's vague to your mind perhaps, but a Jewish person could put this together. That Mark is actually making a reference now to who Jesus is. He is their true leader from God. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Began to teach them many things. We don't have any record of what they're teaching, but this is all part of the context. This is the setup of what's about to take place. He began to teach them many things. We don't know everything he said in this text, but we know what he said. Because we know from the bulk of the Gospels of what Jesus spoke, we know his message. He spoke to them about a kingdom. We don't know specifically what it was that he spoke, but we can surmise it was along these lines. He told them that there was a kingdom that was not of this world and that he was the king, that the only way in is for you to be humble enough to acknowledge your own need. That in fact the poor in spirit are the ones who come into this kingdom. That the way in is on your knees. That the law of this kingdom, if you're going to be in this kingdom, the law of the land is a law of love. That you must love your enemies. That you must love your neighbor. That you must love the law of God. That you must obey the law of God through a heart that loves to be as God has called you to be. There is no war in this kingdom. There is only peace between you and your Creator. There is only peace between you and other people within this kingdom. The rules and the laws of this kingdom is a place where truth and righteousness reigns. This kingdom can only be entered through a spiritual means. It is Christ's kingdom. And this is the message that he preached everywhere he went. You need to be in this kingdom. If you're not in his kingdom, you are in the world's kingdom. What does the world's kingdom look like? It is a place where they celebrate themselves and they put the truth to death by beheading it at their earliest convenience. And this is juxtaposed side by side, the world's kingdom and Christ's kingdom. And now you're beginning to get to see a brand new event that illustrates exactly what it looks like where Jesus is the head of this kingdom. And so, with that context, here's the story you all know. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, now, I don't know if you've ever read the text and realized that this is sort of a little bit, put it in my little cute way, this is a little bit Rudy Pants. They are kind of overstepping their bounds here. Do they not know who Jesus is? Do they not know that he's the master? It grew late, and so they come to him, and they say, excuse me, you might not have recognized this, Jesus, but this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. These people, you need to send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. You might not have the full handle on the whole picture here. You might remember that we came here for a holiday. We're all tired. It's been long. You've been preaching all day long. We love what you're saying, don't get me wrong, but these people here, we're a little worried about them. It's been a long day. They're getting hungry. They need to go and get something to eat. That's what's going on here. There's a bit of friction that's happening. You can almost read this in the disciples' hearts. They're now giving Jesus instructions. How often is this us? We know what God needs to do with this situation. If only he would just come and fix it this way. This is how it needs to be done. We pray our little prayers. We approach Jesus in the very same tenor, the very same kind of mindset. I know this is the situation, and I know what's going to have to happen. But Jesus has other plans. He answered them, you give them something to eat. What? They said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? 200 denarii one denarii is 1 day's wage. 200 days' wages, do the math. It's impossible to figure out from their context to ours what that would be. You get the point. If I had a lot of money, it still wouldn't be enough. One of the gospel writers says, we could buy 200 denarii worth of food. Everybody would get a crumb. I mean, this is part of their response back to Jesus. Do you not get it, Jesus? It can't be done. There's a situation here. There's too many people. And where could we possibly solve? You want us to solve this problem? Now, maybe perhaps Jesus is putting this back on them because they have just come back as the 12 who have been preaching the kingdom, who have been performing miracles, casting out demons. And maybe he's putting this on them to say, do you trust me? Do you know what you can do through me? Do you know how to handle this situation? And all they can see is human terms. All they can do is the human calculation, just like we do. Where am I to get meat to give to all these people? Numbers 11, verse 13 and 14. For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. Is this a familiar text to you? Numbers 11. This is Moses. Very same situation. There are people who are hungry in the multitude of Israel. And he's asking them, where are we going to find food for all these people? And he's praying to God, how am I supposed to feed them? Verse 14, I'm not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. Moses is complaining in Numbers 11 that the people of Israel are hungry. They're coming to him for food, and he doesn't have an answer. And what is the answer that's given to Moses in the Old Testament? When the people are in a desolate place, they're in the wilderness, the people need to be fed. Who feeds them? God feeds them. Who provides for them? God provides for them. That's the setup. Here comes the dramatic part. You want to know who Jesus is? Pay attention to what is going on. There are people in the wilderness. They are hungry. There is a plea to do something about it. They are looking for an answer. Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. John tells us a small boy had the foresight to bring something. His mother perhaps had the foresight to pack him a lunch. I'm going to go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5, 2 fish. As a child, you read this and you think 5 loaves, and you're thinking, a big marshmallow white loaf of Wonder Bread, 5 loaves of Wonder Bread. That's not the text, and you've taught this in Sunday school, I know, I'm sure, and it's just a small hand-sized bun is basically what we're talking about. Irrelevant to us how much, because clearly 5 loaves and 2 fish is not going to go very far. Commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. 2 thoughts here, and one is just to show you the command that Jesus has, the authority that he has. And he wants to make aisles. He wants to have this organized. So he has everybody sit down in groups, hundreds by 50s, and he just speaks the word, and they shuffle around, and they start to organize themselves. But I want you to notice where they're sitting. You see, this is a desolate place, it's called, but there is green grass. Commanded them to all sit down in groups on the green grass. Mark is the only gospel writer to point out that little tiny picture. That here the people are sitting down, they're in the wilderness, they're hungry, they're waiting to be fed, and they're sitting down on green grass. I have no question in my mind that Mark is alluding to a very familiar phrase to us from the Old Testament. I don't know if you're familiar with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. This is the picture of who Jesus is constantly referencing back. He is the shepherd of the sheep. He is the one who provides. He is the one who is the leader of Israel. He is the one who constantly cares for us. He is the one who constantly oversees us. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Very Jewish thing to do. Just how Jews often responded to their food. They just gave thanks for what they had received, taking it as from God. Now here's the mystery to this. You all know this story so well. You all know the miracle. But here's what we don't know that you think you might know. Is we don't know what happened. We don't know how this took place. The text is not clear. It kind of gives us a little bit of a glimpse of it. But we don't know exactly when this miracle happened. Here's what the text says. He broke the loaves, snapped it in 2, or snapped it in 1,000,000 pieces. I don't know. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. The disciples have half a loaf each. And now every time somebody's reaching for food, they come back again and there's still more bread. And every time somebody reaches for a pinch of bread, there's still more bread. Or did he do this in his hands? We don't know. There's a mystery to this that you may not have ever thought of before. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. Did the disciples perform the miracle through Jesus? Or did Jesus perform the miracles before he gave it to the disciples? Who cares? Because Jesus gets the credit. But here's what we see. We see a miracle of creation from the only one who can say, let there be, and there was. This is a direct reference to the God who speaks ex nihilo, right out of nothing, and there is. Jesus is the one who brings something from nothing. He gave to the disciples, and he set before the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. Divided in half, broke them up. They all ate and were satisfied. This much we know. There is no question at the outcome of what took place. Every person there ate to the point of being full. Here you have the beginning of this story, this banquet of celebrating ourselves, the banquet that would be full of the richest of food. And now you have the people of Israel sitting in the wilderness on green grass, eating peasants' food under the leadership of King Jesus. One king or the second king? Which kingdom are you in? The only way into Jesus' kingdom is through a spiritual entrance of your own humble heart, of recognizing your own sinful need, your own desperate state, to recognize that he becomes your king, and you surrender your life under his leadership and his kingship, and his commands and his righteous requirements become the law of your life, and you follow him as your leader. Or are you following the world and allowing the world to feed you and doing what the world says? This is the picture that Mark lays out as we hear this story. And they ate and they were satisfied. Peasants' food, I grant you. But I bet it tasted delicious. I'll bet you that was, when Jesus made it, I bet that was the freshest bread you could imagine. I bet that fish was roasted to perfection. I bet it tasted like nothing you have ever tasted before with regards to bread and fish, because it came from the hand of a sinless creator. And they ate till they were satisfied. And every gospel writer wants to make sure that every reader gets that clear. They start out with nothing, next to nothing, and they end up with full bellies. By the way, this is an aside, but I'm making a plug for our verse of the month, because we're into a new month. I want to point something out to you from Luke 6:35 that I think ties in, sort of a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it's a nice way to make a plug for our verse. Here's Mark 6:35, a quote of Jesus: "Love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High." Okay, now why should you love your enemies? Why should you lend expecting nothing in return? Why will your reward be great when you do this? Why would you get the label of being sons of the Most High? Because here's the answer. He, God, is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. That's our God. There is a thing we call in theology common grace. That God is just good for the sake of being good. Did these people deserve to be fed? It was free. Did Jesus need to feed them? Why would he need to feed them? He chose to do so because God is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. This is the reason that people enjoy love and life and family and holidays and sunsets and retirement and all that the joys of life have to give. Everybody can experience great things in life. There is no shortage on the joys that can be found in this world. All the fun of bungee jumping and skydiving and roller coaster rides and all that this world offers to us is from the hand of a good God who gives it to everybody to enjoy. Sunshine and rain falls on every person, the ungrateful and the evil. And when you see the feeding of the 5,000, there is no delineation. None for you, none for you. You can have double, none for you. No, everybody gets fed. And it is indiscriminate. It is who our God is. He cares for all and everyone. Now that doesn't mean everyone is in the kingdom. I already told you that. There's a way into the kingdom. It's your own human humility, your own human decision. But in general terms, this is who God is, and we see this in this feeding. There's a little vignette that every gospel writer adds to this. They took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of I read in a commentary this week that the reason that they did this is because Jesus doesn't like littering. That just kind of made me smile. I'm really sure that's not the reason. There are 12 basketfuls. By the way, here's a piece of trivia for you that you don't care about. The Greek word for basket here, kokophanos, is where we get our English word for coffin. It's kind of odd. This basket is not coffin size. It's actually a basket that every Jew, generally speaking, would carry with him on a daily basis, part of his daily routine, his daily putting himself together. You might picture it as a fanny pack. If you're a woman, you might call it your purse, your handbook, your handbag, whatever you want to call it. There are things that they carried with them. They just had with them. This is the basket that the disciples had as their little catch-all, where they're going to keep their nail file and their wallet and whatever's going on. They carry it around with them. So why are there exactly 12 basketfuls of leftovers? Clearly, how many disciples do we have? Did Jesus start making bread and go, oh, I made some leftovers. Oh, I got carried away. No. Don't you see how perfect this miracle is? He even cares for his disciples that every single one of them filled up their basket, and his miracle was right to the exact crumb, to precision and perfection, right to everybody in the crowd being satisfied, and even his 12 disciples received exactly what they needed. Everybody, to the letter, was fed. Not a single crumb unnecessarily broken from that bread. That's the picture. This is with precision. And those who ate the loaves, famous text for 5,000 men. Mark leaves that to the end so that your jaw kind of drops when you read this. Of course, we're so familiar with it that it means nothing to us. But a first-time reading to realize, oh, this wasn't 14 people sitting on the beach. Wait a second, what? Let me read that again. And in fact, Matthew makes sure that the reader knows those who ate were about 5,000 men besides the women and children. We actually don't know the full number. 5,000 men, 5,000 women, 5,000 more children. We're talking at least 15,000, give or take. 20,000, 25,000. We have no idea. John gives us this little glimpse of what has now taken place. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. They caught on to what took place. I don't know how this crowd this big, they saw this little bread, they saw what was going on. Maybe they were pinching off their piece and watching it, and everybody was eating, and I'll have some more, please. And they came back, and there was always more, and they put together, I know what this is unbelievable. Think about if this guy was ruling our country. Think of the food we would have. Think of how amazing this place would be. Think of what we'd find in our grocery stores, and all they could think about was themselves and their own belly. This is indeed the prophet who was come into the world, perceiving then that they were to come and take him by force to make him king. They wanted the king to be a king of this earth. They wanted a king who would rule in Herod's place. They wanted a king who would rule over Rome. They wanted a king who would rule for themselves. I can tell you this, to this day, there are people, perhaps even in this room, who only want Jesus for what they think they will get out of it. They only want Jesus for the good stuff. I only want enough of Jesus that I get to go to heaven when I die. But I don't really want enough of Jesus that I have to give up all my sin and myself and all the things I love. I don't really want enough of him that I really have to follow him completely. I only want him on my terms. This is very common. And to this day, there are people who are willing to follow Jesus, who are excited to gather around Jesus as long as it's on their own terms. They take him by force and make him king. Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. I'm out of here, he said. This is not what I'm about. This is how Mark puts it. Mark uses his favorite word again. Immediately, constant word in the Gospel of Mark, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat. We know the immediately was because what John has given us the picture of how the crowd reacted. Jesus realizes, got to run. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida. Well, he dismissed the crowd, and after he had taken leave of them, he went up the mountain to pray. So now we have another miracle at the end of this text, which we'll not go fully into, because I want to pull this together this morning, but I want to show you how the gospel writers put these events in an order so that you follow his train of thought. These are not haphazardly written. They're not just throw them out in a index cards and let's see now, we'll put this story. They'll just gather them up and there's my book. There's an order. There's a reason. Now immediately, he goes up on the mountain to pray, and Jesus is going to come to his disciples walking on the water. The fourth watch, this is 3 in the morning of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, just jumping into the middle of the context of later of Mark 6, end of verse 48. He meant to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. Verse 51. He got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. This I find so fascinating. They didn't get it. They had eaten bread to their satisfaction, and they still had not put together who this man was. So he's walking on the sea, and they flip out. That's not possible. Guys, do you not remember what you just did this afternoon and what just happened? How many people ate how much and where that came from? And you're still surprised that he defies the laws of physics. You're shocked by this. And now you're surprised that the wind has died down when he gets into the boat. And you're still flipping out and terrified. Guys, what's it going to take for you to recognize and acknowledge that this Jesus is not just a man? He's not just a good moral teacher. He is the king of a kingdom that you can only enter on your knees. He is the king of a kingdom that is an invisible kingdom that you will only find yourself entering when your heart is humble enough to admit your own need. That he is a king of a kingdom who will satisfy everybody to the nth degree, to their heart's content. Every heart hunger that you have is satisfied only in Christ. That he is the one who meets the deepest need, the deepest longing of every heart that's looking for meaning, for purpose, for genuine love, for true acceptance, for acceptance from your Creator. It's only found in the one who can feed you to the nth degree and satisfy you. Guys, don't you get this? There are people in this room to this day, in this moment, who think that Jesus is just a nice teacher. They've got him like a lucky charm around their neck. They hold on to him like they think somehow that they've got some head knowledge and that's enough. That they've got some glib understanding of what we're talking about, and so we are just fine. Their hearts are still hard. You can read this text, you can read the miracles, you can see what he's done, and you still don't bow your knee. How is that possible? I do not know. But I can tell you that Mark has done everything he can possibly think of to give every reader the opportunity to acknowledge and to recognize who this man is. He's not just a man. He creates out of nothing. He defies the laws of physics. He defies the laws of gravity. He deals with the weather. Do you not understand? He is God in the flesh. And he is the only one who gives you life and life indeed. And if you don't flee to him, then you know nothing of life. All you have is the government of this world that celebrates itself, that joys itself in its own banquets, and beheads the truth at its nearest convenience. Whose kingdom are you in? This is the Christ that Mark presents to us. He is the Messiah, the Son of God. You must bow the knee. You must enter his kingdom. You must do so for yourself. This is the gospel of Mark.